What is up, everybody? Welcome to this week's edition of the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. There is just constantly so much. There are things I would like to talk about on this show that unfortunately I just don't have time to. We're going to start, as we always do here on the Touchline Talk Show, with Champions League reaction, actually going through all of the groups, talking about what they look like 4 games into the group stage. And then it's MLS playoff time. One of my favorite sporting competitions, events of the year. So I'm going to break it all down, talk about the teams I think are real contenders, the biggest storylines heading in, all of that good stuff. But as always, going to the Champions League first. This week I actually wanted to sort of go through and break down each group instead of talking about 2 or 3 bigger games, both based on the results that happened and the fact that there weren't as many high profile individual games that I felt like deserved attention, and because I haven't actually done this where we're going through every single group to help set the stage with 2 games remaining, and now the fact we have some teams who have already booked their spot into the knockout stage. So we're going to go in alphabetical order, starting with Group A. Of course, the story here continues to be Napoli get another win over Ajax to book their spots in the Champions League knockout stage. And Liverpool gets an early scare, goes down. Scott Arfield scores for Rangers, and then Liverpool score and score some more, and then Mo Salah comes on and scores the fastest hat trick in Champions League history, and they end in an absolute demolition of Rangers to maintain that second spot in the group, with Ajax losing again to Napoli. And so this is pretty clear. Liverpool is in a terrific position in that second game. It all changed when they were able to beat Ajax, and then Ajax didn't take any points off Napoli. And so Liverpool all of a sudden are in a good position here. Ajax, I do want to point out, though, there is some hope. Just in the sense that if you beat Liverpool, and you can do so convincingly, Liverpool do have to play Napoli again. Now, that could very well be a Napoli team with nothing to play for. But there is that part of it that you can make up 3 points just by beating Liverpool yourself, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that you get a little help as well. But that's asking a lot. Liverpool just have to get something somewhere, and they're going to be just fine. Also on Napoli, before I jump off of this group, they're 4 goals, 6 goals. I mean, they're scoring at a ridiculous rate. And by the way, Victor Osimhen came back after a month being sidelined with an injury, and he's, doing his thing again. All of this has happened. The Liverpool game was the game he got injured in at the very beginning. And everything they've done in the last month plus is without their preferred number 9. It's absolutely remarkable the amount of contributions they're getting from all over the place. They continue to just do their thing. And so now, one of the first teams into the knockout stage, Liverpool on the verge of joining them and kind of rounding out Group A from that standpoint. And certainly Ajax are in position to get that Europa League spot at the very worst. Group B. Shout out Club Brugge. I mentioned this a little bit. Officially in. All these games keep ending in strange results where nobody's consistent outside of Club Brugge. You get some draws in there, and 10 points are enough to secure you a spot. And then the other game here, Bayer Leverkusen looked terrific in Xabi Alonso's debut. And that one didn't go so good today. Nothing went their way at the beginning of the game. I mean, they can't convert a penalty. You get a goal chopped off and all of a sudden Porto are kind of running wild to maintain that second spot in this group. Everything is still in play here, obviously, because it's so tight. But I'm really looking at that Atleti Porto game in Portugal on the final match day as perhaps one of the most important games, at least on match day 6 and potentially of the entire group stage. I've highlighted a couple other ones I felt were really, really important, including that Liverpool-Ajax game that Liverpool managed to win. I think this one is also right there because Atletico Madrid just have not done enough. But Porto also haven't capitalized to the fullest extent possible, and so this is very much up for grabs. And the Club Brugge aspect of this is interesting too because, okay, yeah, you haven't locked up the first spot yet, but you're getting pretty close to that too. What does Club Brugge provide these last two games knowing they're already in, and what an accomplishment that is? That's always sort of the other part of this is you might catch a break with the team you play later. Now, of course, Porto and Atletico Madrid had that head-to-head end, but this is very much wide open, and that's the game I'm looking at. Today's story, though, is really about Club Brugge finding a way to get a point. Wasn't always pretty, but Simone Mignolet came up big. That's all you needed to make sure you're going through. Congratulations to them. And then we get to where we're going to spend the most time here, and that is Group C. The big storyline coming out of these two games is what happened with Inter and Barcelona. Before I get to that, Bayern Munich score some more, ultimately concede 2 goals, but I'd already put 4 past Victoria Pilsen. 4 for 4, automatically in, so they're another team that has clinched their spot in the knockout stage. Wanted to acknowledge that before I get into Inter and Barca. There are a couple things I want to say before I get to the failings of Barcelona here. One is, it has to be acknowledged who was playing in that back line today. You're missing center back after center back after center back. You don't have, just in the defensive midfield, the back line, Xavi had nothing close to his preferred team. And the way that those goals were conceded, it was quite obvious that was the situation. Again, it's not Barcelona being bad. And that's one of the most fascinating parts of this. And, they do get the draw, so they're not technically eliminated. But what is turning into another disastrous Champions League campaign is it's not like they're getting outplayed every single game. And this group had 3 teams that are 3 of the top 16 in the world, and only 2 can go through. So you got unlucky in that sense as well. But it's this combination of, they didn't capitalize on some of the opportunities and the games where they outplayed teams and left this window, left the door open to something like this happening. And then you get all the injuries and your margin of error is gone. And so you have a game like this where you're able to rescue a point, and it's probably not going to matter at all because you didn't have the ability to drop points. This game, you were in control if you won it, and you were in big trouble if you didn't. This is another one of those pivotal games in the group stage, one of the most important of any group, because it shifted the balance between Inter and Barcelona so significantly. Not only in the points part of this, but also in the tiebreaker part of this. Barcelona had to win this game, and they didn't. Partially that has, the center backs, Xavi doesn't want to be playing either of those guys, and he had to play both of them. That's part of the story here. And the other thing is, I was at one point prepared to come in here and talk about Robert Lewandowski not delivering in a big moment again. But then he equalized this twice to keep their Champions League hopes alive and was playing like a guy who didn't want to go to the Europa League. And so you did get that part of it, and they did score their goals. Right? The story coming into this has been not taking the opportunities. They're creating these chances. They deserve to win, but they're not actually scoring. You get the 3 goals today, but the defense lets you down, and you have to keep digging yourself out of a hole as opposed to being on the front foot for most of this game and in control. And it was kind of a weird back and forth where Inter were really good at the beginning. Barcelona survive. Then Inter have to go retake the initiative after Barcelona opened the scoring and do so. And then Barcelona regains some energy and gets it, Robert Lewandowski scores. You have time to go get a winner. You concede again. You equalize again. It was just so back and forth. It's not like Inter played him off the field or anything. The draw was probably a fair result, but it wasn't good enough because you lost the first one when you were the better team. You lost to Bayern when you were the better team. You didn't do what you needed to do to capitalize on these performances. So it creates this really weird dilemma where I still am impressed with Barcelona as a team. And look at what they're doing in La Liga. They are playing quite well. This idea of Xavi needs to go, to me, is ridiculous. What is he supposed to do? Look at the team he inherited. Look at where they've already gotten. And all of that goes to the larger point that I will talk about some here, which is the inevitable discussion about the idea that and I've talked about this when Barcelona chose to do it, that you sacrificed your future or bet your future on consistent Champions League excellence. Just disregarded all logic, all concern about the financial ramifications of what you were doing, with the idea that if you pull enough levers and get by for now, you're going to be able to turn this team back into one of the very best in Europe that is, and not only that, a team that is also going to consistently deliver, Champions League semifinals, Champions League finals, and of course winning the Champions League. Getting all of those payouts, after every single round. It's not enough to just get Barcelona back to being a team that can win La Liga. What they were really betting on was the Champions League part of this. And they were absolutely good enough. Absolutely good enough to go through in this group. And now they're hanging on for dear life to the hope that somehow Inter drop 4 points from these next 2 games. And on the Inter side of this, the other part of this that makes it so bizarre for me, they still have not beaten a good team not named Barcelona all season. But they've done enough. Because Barcelona just didn't have that cutting edge, they clearly were not up for the challenge of getting through this group. And that's what they were betting on, is that, right, there's always a chance you get put in a tough group. There's also always a chance, for some reason, you end up second and you draw Manchester City in the round of 16. It's not a guarantee you get to the Champions League semifinals every season. And that was basically the way Barcelona were operating. And now, unless a miracle happens, they're headed back to the Europa League. But this can't be a commentary on Xavi. It's a commentary on the situation he inherited and the way this club is being run. He is doing a very, very good job. They are significantly better than when he took over. And that's all you can ask for him as a manager. They're just, didn't go from being a non-factor on the European stage, essentially, or a team that goes out in the quarterfinals, to a top 3 team in Europe. And honestly, I've had them in my top 5, top 8 most of the season because they've been playing like it. But that doesn't mean you're one of the 3 favorites to win the Champions League. It's a different level of competition, a different question. And the answer clearly has been they are simply not ready for that challenge yet, which is understandable considering how far they had to go to turn from what they were to what they're expected to be in order to save this team's financial situation. That's all I've got there, so we're going to move on to Group D. This is just a chaotic mess that changes every single week. Spurs start with a horrific error from Eric Dyer, but then really gain control. Son does his thing, and all of a sudden, they're at the top of the group. Marseille have one of the easier Champions League games you will ever see. Not 1 second yellow, but 2. They were winning and up a man, I think it was in the first 20 minutes. Pretty quickly after that, it was 11-9. And so they just cruised to another win over Sporting Lisbon. So now they had the head-to-head tiebreaker. And in 2 weeks, went from being a team that couldn't win a game in the Champions League to being in control and in position to make the round of 16 and get out of their group. Because, again, nobody has separated themselves, and they beat the team they needed to twice. Spurs were always the best team in this group and are starting to play like it. And on paper, Marseille is team number 2. And based on what has happened this season domestically, Marseille are team number 2. I mentioned that when they were incredibly disappointing over those first 2 games. Now things have kind of flipped. They're catching some breaks. They're taking advantage. And really, even if they lose to Spurs again, there's a good chance that they're still going to be in control of their own destiny and be able to get out of this group. I really like their chances now, which is something I never thought I would be saying 2 weeks ago. But here we are. Group E, another one that has changed sort of week to week depending on what happens. Chelsea now at the top. Controversial red on Fikayo Tomori. I probably would have given it a yellow, but to me that was a penalty. And Chelsea were the better team. That's not the reason they won this game. Yes, I know. And Olivier Giroud did have a chance pretty quickly after the red and the penalty that ensued. Did it take away Milan's chance to win? Yeah, probably. Were they going to? I'm just not convinced they were. So Chelsea do their job and all of a sudden are starting to look better and better and are winning games consistently under Graham Potter, which is something to take note of, that this team is really starting to roll. And Salzburg draw with Dynamo Zagreb to keep the door open for AC Milan. This is going to be another one of those huge games when those two teams meet. Salzburg now have the 2 difficult games left. And Chelsea have not clinched anything, and AC Milan clearly have work to do. So you don't have the luxury of maybe facing a Chelsea team that's heavily changed because they're already through and you don't have to worry about things. Everybody still has stuff to play for in this group. Nobody has guaranteed their spot yet. I still am going to back what I said at the beginning, that Red Bull Salzburg is going to get out of this group. But they got to still do it. This draw was not particularly helpful. And what the draws that they were getting against Milan and Chelsea did was, right, it lowered the amount of points possible. It kept them in the conversation, but at some point you got to pick up 3 points. Because Chelsea and AC Milan are going to start doing that, at least one of them. So that's what this is going to come down to for me. Is I don't think 8 points are going to be enough. Maybe 8 on the nose gets you there. But if Salzburg can find a way to win one more time, they should be through very comfortably. So this is another one. A Salzburg loss and an AC Milan win changes everything. It is all right there. Chelsea could implode. I don't see it happening. But this is one of the more fascinating groups to follow as some of these become, and I'm going to get to a couple here in particular at the end of this, that are just not that interesting anymore. This is, to me, from the beginning and still the most interesting group we have in the Champions League this year. Group F. Real Madrid avoided a third loss to Shakhtar Donetsk in 4 games over the past, I believe it's 3 seasons. They didn't play them last year. But if I had kind of forgotten that Shakhtar beat them twice, and Shakhtar gave them all kinds of trouble this season as well, but they do get a point out of it. And those drop points for Shakhtar are a big, big deal, because this could have gotten, I don't think Real Madrid would have been in trouble had they lost. But this would have gotten interesting, because you've got those 3 teams that all would have been right there. And now it's Real Madrid clearly in charge of this thing, and Leipzig and Shakhtar battling for spot number 2. Leipzig got some much-needed wins against Celtic. Poor Celtic. It's not happening for the Scottish teams. Incredibly disappointing. Really thought they were going to perform better, and it's not happening. So that is notable that Leipzig did their job, which is something that, Shakhtar weren't able to do both times against Celtic. But Leipzig also lost to Shakhtar and Real Madrid by a combined score of 6-1 the first time around. Even though they are in position number 2 right now, I am skeptical about their ability to hold on to that. But at the same time, if they beat Shakhtar, they're in really good shape. So this is another one of those strange groups. I'm really intrigued by this battle. It's clear these are the 3 teams that are going to continue in European competition. Real Madrid is going to go through. The question is, can Leipzig sort of ride this sort of wave of momentum? But it's not like they're playing great in the Bundesliga. But Timo Werner is starting to score goals. Can they ride that to an important win against Shakhtar and get themselves in? Or is Shakhtar going to continue this incredible run during this incredibly challenging period in their history and just the situation they're in, and incredibly somehow find a way to get through? That's another group to keep an eye on moving forward in these final 2 weeks. Group G, there is not much to say here. Manchester City sat some players ahead of this game against Liverpool over the weekend. Then Riyad Mahrez, who for some reason took another penalty. Now, I believe he did convert one recently in the Premier League. I don't remember which game, but I've harped on this before. Statistically, he's just not the guy who should be taking penalties. He misses one. Then City go down a man. They just hold on for a point. It's not going to matter. It's fine. Dortmund then proceeded to also drop points, which makes it even more fine that Manchester City drew. This is one of my frustrations with the Champions League group stage, is these results just don't matter. Most of the time they matter. Most of these groups are extremely competitive, but you get 1 or 2 groups every year where it's very clear who the favorites are, and it turns out that way. Sometimes you're surprised, but there are always stuff that just goes to form, and this is one of those groups this season. You know who the best 2 teams are, and they're performing like it. Jude Bellingham continues to love this competition. He's been spectacular. That's really all I have to say there. Haaland was one of those guys who was rested. It's the amount of games being played this season, I have absolutely no issue with it. And Pep Guardiola has the luxury of basically whatever team he fields, unless he throws 11 academy kids out there, it's a team that expects to win and should win. So you can't really criticize him and say he's not trying to win, because there was more than enough talent out there, despite the fact that some guys were rested. And then finally, Group H. I talked about Benfica after the first draw against PSG. They went and did it again, this time in Paris. Actually, the XG numbers I saw outperformed PSG over those 180 minutes, which is incredible. Now, yes, the second time around you didn't have Messi, and there is another issue that needs to be addressed here in a moment with PSG, but I continue to be impressed with Benfica. They're a top 15 team in the world for me. I don't know what else you want them to do. They've been outstanding domestically and in this competition, and in a group that is not as competitive or as difficult as I thought it would be, because Juventus is falling apart, but also not a give me where they were clearly the second best team heading into this thing. And Maccabi Haifa just beat Juventus, so that says something about Maccabi Haifa too. Before I get on Juve for a minute here, I want to at least acknowledge the Kylian Mbappe situation, the reports he wants to leave. This is one of those things I refuse to just speculate on and just talk about because there were some reports. Of course, I will address this more if he actually leaves or if we get some kind of noteworthy development. The couple things I will say quickly, though. First, and I saw even, I believe Julien Laurent made this point on a video I was watching that I believe was at some point during the Champions League coverage. I could be wrong about all that. If I am, I apologize. But I believe he was saying, it's not just me who's reporting this. And even if it was just Julien Laurent reporting this, one of the interesting aspects of this to me is it's Fabrizio Romano, it's Julien Laurent, it is big names who are coming out and verifying this stuff. Maybe they weren't I don't think they were the very first to report that Mbappe is unhappy and wants to leave. But very quickly, once the rumors started coming out and some of the more tabloidy stuff, the most credible sources in this game from a media standpoint hopped on real quick and verified it. People are not going to, I think Jamie Carragher was the one that made this point, right? People are not going to risk their credibility on this if there's not a good reason for it. Now, what does he want? He's unhappy mean? Does he actually want to leave? That part is still a little iffy to me, although it certainly seems that people are saying he wants to leave. I'm just open to the possibility that got misconstrued somewhere in there and they're able to figure this out. So that's part one, is this is legit. I find it hard to believe that, and I am a person who is skeptical about soccer reporting. There's too much just nonsense that flies around. But these people, the people who have come and said, I've got sources, I can verify this, I'm putting my name on it, speaks volumes about how serious this situation is and how unhappy Mbappe is. The second thing I will say is I'm not at all surprised that PSG are basically just refuting this in every way possible and saying he is a PSG player and he's going to honor his contract. What incentive do they have to, even if he is unhappy, you can't, and I talked about this when he signed this contract, you cannot replace him. The only player who is comparable in the world is Erling Haaland, and he's not going anywhere for at least the next couple seasons. It's not just losing Mbappe, it is the fact that there is not another player who fits his skills, his resume, and his age profile. There is no comparison. And of course, he plays a different position than Haaland. So even that is not, now Haaland would be a perfect fit in this team from you put Messi on one side, Neymar on the other, or play him underneath or something like that. But there's no point having that conversation because Haaland's not going to PSG in the near future. So, what incentive do PSG have to cave into his commands if this is really the case and he wants to leave? At the very least, they can hold out for the best possible deal from Real Madrid. And are Real Madrid going to go sit there and say, yeah, we'll splash 200 million euros, 250 million euros on him, and then pay the most expensive wages in the world because Mbappe is the highest paid player in the world right now, on a guy that 5 months ago they could have had for free, who chose not to join their team? Now, previous reporting had said they were willing to spend all of that money on him when his contract was running down. they weren't insistent that they were going to wait for him to become a free agent. So maybe they are willing to spend the money. And ultimately, all contracts do is, from a team perspective, is it gives you leverage. It's not a guarantee you're going to be able to convince guys to stick around. But I want to hear more before I start talking about this from kind of Mbappe's standpoint, and because I do want to be sensitive to the possibility. Basically, what he's saying is that promises were made to him that weren't kept. That's a real thing. My personality makes me very empathetic to that. Also, you signed the contract, man. I will say that. I don't want to get too far into what this says about Mbappe and all of those kind of things. Those are the 2 points I wanted to make quickly on this, though, is there is something to this based on who is reporting it and who is verifying it. And I'm just not convinced the fact Mbappe wants to leave means all that much. Maybe he can force his way out. But Harry Kane wanted to leave Spurs too. And Spurs said at the right price, and Manchester City didn't meet that price. And now Harry Kane is probably going to be a Tottenham player for the rest of his career. Maybe something changes, but that's how quickly this stuff can go. And it's what happens when a team has leverage, and that is what PSG have because Kylian Mbappe signed that contract. He tied his future to theirs, and that is not something you can undo quickly because you are unhappy. I find it hard to believe he's going to be a Real Madrid player by the time the January transfer window ends. Maybe I'm wrong and this is worse than I thought, but I wanted to at least give some thoughts on that because it is a huge story and he is one of, again, 2 players above everybody else that can change the complexion of the European hierarchy are Mbappe and Haaland. Haaland just moved. Mbappe apparently wants to move, so I'm going to address that, but that's as far as I'm going to go for now. I want to hear more. I want to understand exactly what Mbappe is upset about. I just ultimately think this is going to blow over and not end up being a huge deal. Kind of the same thing that, we're not talking about Harry Kane and how he wanted to leave anymore. We're talking about Harry Kane delivering for Spurs in the Champions League. I think that's what we're going to get to, and Mbappe is going to at least ride out this contract. Whether he signs another one, I was never convinced of that anyway. I still think he's going to play these seasons for PSG, and then he's somewhere between now and when his contract expires, he's going to be at Real Madrid. I just don't think it's going to happen in January. That is all for the Champions League. I'm going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, MLS Playoff Preview time. Really looking forward to this. I have strong beliefs and theories. I'm going to talk about them and explain who is actually capable of winning this MLS Cup and what makes this MLS playoff bracket different than anyone I can remember in recent history. You're watching the Touchline Talk Show. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. It is MLS Playoff Preview time. I cannot wait. This is truly one of my favorite sporting events of the year. It, in my opinion, and of course I'm biased because of the soccer side of this, but it rivals any postseason tournament in terms of entertainment value and unpredictability. It's March Madness, but you don't even have to deal with the bad teams and the teams that just, going in, 40 of those teams aren't going to even have a shot at making the Final Four. That is not the case in the MLS playoffs. That is just not how this works. But that is the best comparison. And of course, just this format, the way March Madness works, the way MLS playoffs work, Part of me despises it, in all honesty, from a soccer standpoint, and wants more emphasis and respect placed on Supporters Shield. But there's a reason people in this country love the playoffs. It's because they are endless chaos and entertainment, and MLS in particular delivers on that front. So what I'm going to do here is I've divided the playoff teams, all 14 of them, into 4 categories. We've got Cinderellas, Dark Horses, Contenders, and Favorites. Cinderellas, I'm categorizing as teams that have no business winning this thing. I would be stunned if they actually find a way to hoist MLS Cup. The Dark Horses are, I don't think they're going to get all the way to MLS Cup, but I wouldn't be shocked if they make a little bit of a run. They are dangerous. I can tell you why they're going to pull some upsets. The Contenders are the teams I can make a case for winning MLS Cup. And the Favorites are the teams that I expect to actually, I guess I will say, make MLS Cup. I view the Favorites on a completely different level, where I think they are a class above everybody else, and not just because of the way they finished. I have a very specific reason I'm going to get to for the way I broke this down. So, to start, we're going least likely to most likely, so we're going to start with the Cinderellas. I have 3 of them: Miami, Orlando, Real Salt Lake. Miami, Gonzalo Higuaín has been fantastic, and that is about all Miami has. They've been hot and cold, pretty good recently. There's just nothing about this team's history, about this roster, that suggests they're going to be able to go and beat the best teams in this league 3-4 times to make a deep run in this tournament. Higuaín by himself is not enough at this point to make this happen. RSL. Actually, I'll go to Orlando next. We'll stay in the East. Orlando is only here because the Columbus Crew can't hold on to a lead. Orlando has been really poor recently, kind of since winning the U.S. Open Cup. I thought that might spur them on, and they just fell right back down the Eastern Conference. Again, also, I don't see the difference maker you need. And finally, RSL. It is important to remember, even though RSL won against the Seattle Sounders last season, they did nothing offensively. There is no Bobby Wood. There is no Damir Kreilach. They have this ability to get in. They can win a game. I also find it hard to believe they're going to replicate last season when they defied all of the logic and found a way to make some magic happen. They just don't score enough goals. And I'm not looking at... If you had a Damir Kreilach and a Bobby Wood, then maybe we can talk about something. But I like last year's team better than this one, even though this team's been a little more consistent, I would argue. I just have a hard time believing they're going to go on the road and just knock off team after team. So those are the Cinderellas. Then we get to the Dark Horses. I have 5. Cincinnati, New York Red Bulls, Minnesota United, LA Galaxy, FC Dallas. Cincinnati's defense is vastly improved. Congratulations, you didn't get the wooden spoon this season. It is not good enough to go game after game after game and go all the way through to win MLS Cup. This will get into my philosophy, and I've talked about this before, and I'll bring it up again when we get to the favorites, about what it takes to be successful in a knockout-style tournament like this. It applies to March Madness as well. You have got to have more than one way to win. And you have got to be able to survive the game where the thing you do great doesn't happen. Cincinnati is terrific offensively. The Vasquez, Acosta, Brenner trio is terrific. They can score goals with anybody in this league, which means they can beat anybody on any given day because they can just blow you away offensively. But they're not going to score 3 goals in every single playoff game. That's just not how the postseason works. That's not how the sport works. And you just can't rely on your offense being that good every single game. So you've got to be able to hold up defensively. Maybe they can do it once. I would not be stunned if they are one of the teams that goes farther than they're supposed to. Now, by definition, they're not supposed to go very far at all. I could see a world in which they even knock off Philadelphia. But the difference between getting there and winning MLS Cup is where I have my mental hurdle. I like them. They're just not quite there yet where they're a real contender. And they're also, the other part of this is that team has very little playoff experience, especially in the key spots. Vasquez, Renner, Matt Miazga has not been in this league for a while. It's not like they're completely devoid of experience, but I want a team who has been there together collectively, and of course, this is Cincinnati's first run at this. New York Red Bulls. It's the same story even when they won the Supporters' Shield. Do you have the difference maker and the star power necessary? Because the power of the collective is much greater over a 34-game regular season. I'll get back to this point later, too. What you need in the playoffs is you need somebody who can be the best player on the field. And I don't see that with the New York Red Bulls. It is also not shocking the New York Red Bulls have a history of disappointing playoff performances because this team, historically, and this team falls into that category, have not been built to win in the postseason. Of course, the past few seasons, they haven't exactly been, Supporters' Shield caliber, so it's not as much of an indictment on them. Again, can they win a game? Sure. Can they cause some problems for some people? Yeah. They just don't have enough to be a legitimate contender. Minnesota United. I really, really want to put them in the contenders category. What is stopping me is the fact that this thing went off the rails when Bakaye Dabasi got hurt. And not only did it go off the rails defensively, they have 4 goals in their last 7 games. They scored the goals they needed to actually clinch this playoff spot. But they nearly fell, more than halfway down the Western Conference playoff. I think they were up into 3rd at one point, if I remember correctly. They were flying. And then it all fell apart. I just have a hard time saying this team, in this bad of form, is going to turn everything around. The reason I'm putting them in the dark horses rather than the Cinderellas, their lowest seed I have in this dark horse category, is because they have done this before. Emmanuel Reynoso is that dude. They can beat anybody. I don't care who is in front of them. They have a chance. There's just too many holes to poke in this particular team for me to believe they're going to get anywhere close to actually winning the whole thing. But of those lower seeds, absolutely the one team I would want to avoid is Minnesota United. LA Galaxy. Similar to Cincinnati, my question is the defense, and simply, can you be consistent and pragmatic enough to actually win in the playoffs? The good is really good, the bad is pretty bad with the Galaxy. Now, adding Ricky Pooch has changed the equation to a certain extent. I now believe they can do this. There's just a difficult path, first of all. Second of all, I don't like their first round matchup. We'll get to that team in a minute. And I'm not going to sit here and say the LA Galaxy, who have been throwing away playoff berths left and right over the past few seasons, are going to all of a sudden get in and then go win the whole thing. Making it was an important step, and when a lot of teams were kind of fading, they did a pretty good job sort of keeping things going to a certain extent and not falling apart. That's about as excited as I can be about this team, though. I want no part of them if I'm LAFC. I will say that. We're getting to the teams. If I had to pick 2 more teams to throw into the contenders category, it would be Minnesota and the LA Galaxy. I just am not convinced the Galaxy are going to be able to control games and hold on to leads and do the little things you need to have success in the postseason when every kind of situation is going to get thrown at you. Finally, the other team I have here is FC Dallas. I know they've been playing well. I know they were great all season. They do have enough in attack with Alan Velasco and Jesus Ferreira and Paul Arriola. Where I'm scared is that midfield. When you look at teams that win MLS Cup, I'll just start rolling them off, starting with last season. Now, this was a little bit of an exception, but you still had Maxi Morales there. Keaton Parks was part of that team. There was some talent in that NYCFC midfield. And then you go before that, and we're talking about Lucas Elron, Darlington Nagbe, and Artur. And you go before that, and we're talking about Nico Lodeiro. You can keep going down the list. It is the combination of the elite attacking player and the midfield. I will not pick a team to make MLS Cup that doesn't have a difference maker in midfield. I need that creative force. And yes, Dallas have some of that on the wings with Velasco and with Arriola. It's not enough for me. So those are my dark horses, which means we go into contenders. I have 4. So 3 Cinderellas, 5 dark horses, and 4 contenders. NYCFC, Montreal, Nashville, Austin. NYCFC has to be here because they're getting healthy, because they won last season, because this group knows how to do it. At the same time they're getting healthy, though, that Talles Magno injury terrifies me. And it terrifies me because Tati Castellanos isn't here. Talles Magno has to be the difference maker in attack. And it's now hard to see that happening. Additionally, I just don't think they have quite enough to, and pieces are going out, pieces are coming in. It's not like this group has been cohesive. That's another worry of mine. I have a hard time picking repeat champions anyway as a personal philosophy across all sports. It's one of those things I don't think gets enough attention paid to it about how difficult it is to go repeat. This team was good enough to do it with Tati Castellanos. Bottom line, I don't think they're good enough to do it without him. Montreal. I have seen that this has become one of the trendy picks. They have been fantastic. Wilfried Nancy should win MLS Coach of the Year, in my opinion. I have 2 questions that prevent me from believing Montreal can do this. 1, who is your game changer? Is it Jordi Mihailovic? Jordi Mihailovic can be. Jordi Mihailovic also has not been particularly great since he got hurt and had to pull out of that U.S. men's national team camp. Beginning of the season, Jordi Mihailovic can be your difference maker. That is not who Jordi Mihailovic has been the second half of the season. If you don't have that guy, especially when you don't have an elite striker in front of him, I'm sorry, I'm not picking you to win MLS Cup. And the second part of this, which is what makes this really interesting for me about Montreal, is can they win at home? They are phenomenal on the road. If they can actually get to a point where they're theoretically playing road games, they absolutely can win those. I'm more concerned about the early exit than I am about losing in the conference semifinals or something. Or the conference finals, because they're going to have home games up through a potential trip to Philly. To me, they do the hard work and they're absolutely going to give the Union all kinds of trouble if that's the matchup that ends up happening and it happens at Subaru Park. I'm just terrified about a 2 seed that wasn't good at home. Home field advantage doesn't mean the same thing for Montreal it does for some of these other teams. So then we go to the Western Conference with my contenders, Nashville. I love this Nashville team. There is a reason this Nashville team shows up and does well in the postseason consistently, even in their short history. Defensively sound, terrific goalkeeper, big-time difference maker in Hani Mukhtar. Checks 3 of the boxes. They travel well because of that defense, because of the fact he can win a game for you. If somebody else could put the ball in the net and get hot, this team can 100% win the whole thing. I said before, I don't like that matchup at all for the LA Galaxy. And I don't like it for LAFC either if that's what happens next. But we've gone 34 games and nobody has developed as a consistent secondary goal scorer to Hani Mukhtar. One guy is not enough. But if somebody gets hot, watch out. They're one of the 4 best teams in this league if that happens. And I will not pick against their track record of success. It is not an accident. They are one of those teams that are built for these single elimination tournaments. They need something else in attack. Otherwise, I would have them among the favorites. That's how strongly I feel about them if somebody else scores. And then Austin, terrific season, terrific attack. Don't worry about them scoring goals. The defense, similar to Cincinnati. Now, Austin's defense is just good enough that I will consider the possibility that they can actually put together the games needed to go and win MLS Cup. They can get a good defensive performance or two, and that might be all they need because they've been so good going forward all season. So that's why they are in the contender category. And the fact you're playing at home because you earned yourself a number 2 seed and these home games is another added bonus. They're going to be difficult to knock out in Austin. I also think that's what's going to happen, if I'm being honest. But the defense is the separator and why I can't put them among the favorites. And also, again, first playoff experience. This is a group that hasn't done this before. I'm always wary of picking those teams as well. Terrific season, terrific thing to build on. They've got a core of a title contender moving forward. Just got to clean things up defensively a little bit. And, I mean, all they need to do is take another step forward, a much smaller one than they did this season, and they're really talking about something heading into 2023. I can't go and talk about them as one of the favorites. Which gets to our favorites, and yes, on paper this seems boring because it's LAFC and the Philadelphia Union. Your number 1 seeds. Couple things I want to say right off the top here. First, I am fundamentally opposed on principle to picking number 1 seeds. I pick against them actively in this tournament. Yes, we talk about the fact that Supporters Shield winners don't win MLS Cup, and it's true. Toronto is the only one, if I remember the stat correctly, that's won since 2011. The other part of this is the other number 1 seed doesn't win either. I believe the last time that happened the last time the number 1 seed that didn't win the Supporters Shield reached MLS Cup was 2009. I don't like picking the 1 seeds. But what makes this postseason so different for me is that I look at the rest of the league and I cannot identify a single team that checks every box and I go, oh, that's the team that's going to make the run. That team I don't want to play. That team can beat anybody. I can see them winning MLS Cup. I'll give you some examples and sort of talk about my thought process the past couple seasons. Last year, of course, NYCFC fit that category, fit that description. And you had the Portland Timbers and Seattle Sounders in the playoffs, which by definition, they are title contenders. They can win if they get in because they've represented the Western Conference year after year after year. They're not here this season. Then, going back to 2020, to highlight a couple points that I've already talked about and to highlight this one. I could not believe the amount of people who picked the Philadelphia Union to win as the number 1 seed in the East. Yes, I know they were terrific at home that season and somebody had to actually go in there and beat them. But that was a New England Revolution team that had gotten Carlos Hill back. They were dangerous. And the other part of this is, had Darlington Nagbe not got hurt, it would have been evident, maybe not Supporters Shield-wise. But my belief heading in, and I think the numbers back this up and the eye test back this up, when healthy, Columbus was the best team in the league. They just were. The standings didn't show that. But that was another team you look at and you go immediately, title contender. So year after year, there are these teams that are not number one seeds that I can easily talk myself into. They check every single box for me. And I have just gone through and told you my concern about every single other team in these two brackets. I have never been able to do that before. So I wanted to acknowledge that part first. I can't stand picking number one seeds in this tournament because they never win. And that's only a slight hyperbole. So here are my concerns, but specifically the reason why these two teams, to me, are head and shoulders above everybody else. I went back, and my story about this is going to come out tomorrow on Substack as well as on Medium, and looked at and basically built a set of parameters that the last 5 MLS Cup champions fit into, from points per game during the regular season, goals scored, goals allowed, XG, and, as I've talked about, a difference maker, a guy who was top 15 in the league in goal involvements per 90 minutes. And I built a set of qualifications that the last 5 champions have all fit. From the Sounders teams to Atlanta United to Columbus to last year's NYCFC. A bunch of teams that were not number one seeds. There are 2 teams in this playoff field that fit all of those parameters. LAFC and the Philadelphia Union. That is it. So that tells me one of the 2 is going to win. The math backs this up. And the other part of this is, okay, here's my concern about LAFC. I've talked about this before. I hoped Gareth Bale would fix some of this, and he just hasn't. It's been their issue in the past. I need to see LAFC prove, again, as I've mentioned before, they can win different ways. What happens when plan A doesn't work? To me, this is the best addition of LAFC in that sense. That they are built, they're as close as they can be to actually being able to do this. But I just don't know that they can. They need to prove it in the playoffs. When you give up a goal, when you can't score, when you miss a penalty, whatever it might be. And that's where Gareth Bale offering a counterattack, that pace, gives you another way to attack somebody. It's what I loved about that signing. It's all building toward this. Maybe he does play a key role, even if he's not starting. But he hasn't been a difference maker. And so I could see this. And also, I want no part of the LA Galaxy in the playoffs if I'm LAFC. And I want no part of Nashville either, and they're going to have to play one of them. Every single box they do check, though. I just would wish they were a little bit better defensively and not so dependent on controlling games. It's very similar. I think Liverpool is a good comparison. Not that they're the exact same team, but this idea that you are trying to control games sort of from the front, and you have a specific way you are playing. Because they've gotten a little more transition-based with Steve Cherundolo. It's not as sort of systematically breaking teams down possession-based as it was under Bob Bradley. But the core elements of that are still there because many of the players are the same. But what happens when that doesn't work? What happens when you can't score the goal? What happens when you concede a couple goals? Right? They are so good that they can impose their will on every single team in this league. The one game it doesn't happen, it tends to fall apart in the postseason. Just like you've seen with Liverpool. If they can't control games in the midfield and get the ball to their attacking players, they all of a sudden become incredibly vulnerable. The gap between LAFC and the rest of this league is not that big. It's not as big as I thought it would be. You have every right to go pick them and say, I think they're going to do this. Again, Supporters Shield winners just don't. But the Union fall into the same category. Here is what I do want to say about Philadelphia, though. and why I am going to tell you they are my pick to win. You go back to my core tenets and what I want in a playoff contender. Defense, one of the best in the history of this league. Best center back pairing, best goalkeeper, best left back. And a terrific holding midfielder as well. And the difference between this Philadelphia team and the one from 2020 that I could not believe people picked to win. That's a little bit harsh, but it overlooked the fact that they didn't have a difference maker in attack. And that Supporters Shield winners don't win this thing. That is what has changed with this team. Gazdag has been ridiculously good. And he has two guys who are scoring, 30-ish goals between them, in addition to his 20, in Julian Carranza and Michael Ura. This is an exponentially more dangerous Union team than the one that won the Supporters Shield. That was a team that was asking Brendan Aronson to be its creator. Now, of course, the transition, the pressing was a large part of that. But that was my mental hurdle, is I'm just not sure when push comes to shove, you have enough difference makers out there. Again, they were a team built on the collective effort. Jim Curtin says this all the time. If all 11 guys don't show up, we don't win. That's what's changed this season. When all 11 guys show up, they run teams off the field and put 5 goals on them because they don't give up goals. And they've got one of the best attacking trios in the league. And they showed up last season, and if not for COVID, they very well may have been in MLS Cup. And they very well may have won it, considering what NYCFC ended up doing. I sincerely hope we get the best version of this Union team. Because I wasn't entirely convinced they could do it last season. I thought they were going to lose to Seattle in the final. That was my prediction. I am 100% sold on this team. And the final thing I will say is, if this ends up being a Union LAFC final, recent track record for Philadelphia in Bank of California Stadium is very good. Now, they don't win there, but they play some thrilling draws. They will not be intimidated by that environment. They have had success there before. They have performed exceptionally well there before. That's all I'm going to say. But the math will tell you, recent history will tell you, there are only 2 teams that can actually win this thing, that can go from game 1 to the very end in MLS Cup and not have that one game where something goes wrong. And those 2 teams are the number 1 seeds. That is not typically the case. I am not the guy that goes to bat for number 1 seeds in this competition. It's what makes it beautiful. And what makes me, as a sort of soccer purist who loves the idea of a champion determined by round robin, infuriated every single season because the best team in this league just doesn't win the championship. Rarely. But there are times where it becomes clear, like Columbus, they really were the best team in this league. It just didn't happen in that condensed regular season. We know who the best 2 teams in this league are. The question is one of them actually going to win? Or are we going to have to remember these teams' legacies and kind of go to bat for them because somebody else comes out here and steals it from them? But quite honestly, I don't see that happening. I don't think both of them are going to make it to MLS Cup. One of them is going to, and that team is going to win. There's my prediction. Thank you for sticking with my sort of soapbox TED Talk, if you will. I feel very passionately about this subject. I did the deep dive, and there you have it. Going to take another quick break and then jump into the weekend look ahead to round out the show. You are watching the Touchline Talk Show. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show one more time. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is time for the weekend look ahead. I'm going to go through this as quickly as possible, but there are so many games that deserve mentioning this weekend. Starting in England, Arsenal at Leeds, Newcastle and Manchester United, Manchester City at Liverpool, all on Sunday. Liverpool, Manchester City, both rested some players for this game. Can Manchester United keep it going against Newcastle? Can Newcastle kind of vault themselves into the top six conversation? They're sort of hanging around in that 7, 8, 9 range with a bunch of draws. And Arsenal at Leeds. Of course, Arsenal, can they keep this thing going, winning the league? And this is a difficult place to play. And how does Leeds respond after struggling for a little bit here? Really fascinating games in the Premier League. Spain. Talk about some matchups. Atletico Madrid at Athletic Bilbao. Two of the best teams in the league so far this season. And, of course, El Clasico, Barcelona at Real Madrid. Atletico Madrid, Athletic Bilbao Saturday, El Clasico on Sunday. How do Barcelona respond after what just happened and sort of throwing away your Champions League hopes? Real Madrid have not been spectacular recently. If Barcelona win this one, they are well on their way to winning La Liga. Again, that's not something you were talking about before Xavi got there. In Italy, also some not quite as big-time matchups, but Udinese at Lazio, two of the best teams in the league so far this season, and Bologna at Napoli. Those games are both on Sunday. Napoli trying to hold on to first place. Germany. You go from Der Klassiker to the top 4 teams in the league playing each other. Borussia Dortmund travels to Union Berlin. Freiburg travels to Bayern Munich. Both of those games are on Sunday as well. So we could have some major shakeups at the top of the Bundesliga depending on those results. France, Marseille at PSG. It just keeps getting better. PSG dealing with all kinds of stuff on and off the field right now. If they win this one, I just don't care about this recent streak of draws. But this gets interesting if they lose or draw again. Does it mean they're going to lose the league? No, they're going to win the league. But all of a sudden you have to actually go and do that. And right, we have a recent instance to point to where they didn't do their job. And Marseille has been playing really well, so can they keep that going? Then playoffs. MLS first. Your first round games this weekend. Cincinnati at New York Red Bulls Saturday. Nashville at LA Galaxy. Really looking forward to that one. Also on Saturday. RSL at Austin on Sunday. Orlando at Montreal Sunday. And then, of course, you have the other games on Monday. And did not forget the NWSL. Unfortunately, didn't have time to do a full preview. And it's just kind of strange because you're so limited with the amount of teams in there. But your first round games are also this weekend, both on Sunday. Kansas City Current at Houston Dash. Chicago Red Stars at San Diego Wave. Should be two terrific environments in Houston and San Diego. Then we set the stage, figure out who's going to make the semifinals, and bring in those top teams in the league. I expect OL Reign to get this done. They're playing too well, too much talent. But stranger things have happened. So that is the weekend look ahead. That is the show for this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my